to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. The question on my mind today is, why is your freedom so deplorable? Now, obviously, it's not deplorable to everybody, but as you're going to see through some of the stories that I share with you, and particularly through the eyes of many who work within legacy media, your freedom is deplorable. At least it's deplorable to them. The idea that you would think that you can live without their license, without their consent, it's just an affront. And I can think of no better example than the case of Sara Brady, which recently was dismissed. By the way, you knew the Attorney General's office. We actually had Sara on the program here last week. Well, the Attorney General's office had said, we're moving to dismiss the case. A judge earlier this week made it official. The case is done. It's over with. So those of you who are secretly hoping, well, we're going to find some way, some legal loophole to drag her kicking and screaming back into that courtroom, I'm sorry. You're going to have to find someone or something else on which to focus your frustrations. What a terrible miscarriage of justice. Now, of course, it brought out, do I dare say, the best or the worst of Jim Jones? I guess I'll let you be the one who can choose this. Former Attorney General Jim Jones, in his opinion piece in the Sometimes News, says already Idaho AG Raul Labrador is facing conflicts of interest. Now, I'm going to point out here what he's referring to as conflicts of interest are actually conflicts of principle, meaning, like any person who is in elected office, they are going to be faced with the question of, is this something government should be doing in the first place? Government supremacists will say there is nothing that is off limits to government. However, people who are grounded in the knowledge of liberty, people who are statesmen and who understand the principles and practices of freedom will have to admit, sometimes grudgingly, that no, that's not right for the state. And just so we're clear, for what reason do we even have laws? Do we even have government in the first place? If your answer is anything other than so that justice may prevail, I would suggest you take 500 cc's of Frederick Bastiat's The Law and read that essay. You can do it in a matter of an hour and fully understand what he's trying to say. But law is not just there so that the state will always get its way. In fact, law is to restrain the state and to protect our natural rights. That's a topic for another show. Jim Jones says it didn't take long for newly elected Idaho Attorney General Raul Labrador to be confronted by two troubling conflict of interest situations. Again, these are conflict of principle, not conflict of interest. He mishandled the first case and will soon have to act on the second. And then Jim turns into a fortune teller of sorts. Madam Jones tells us the two cases will give Idahoans a flavor of the manner in which he will operate the AG's office during his tenure. Well, tell us more, Jim. During his first week, Labrador moved to dismiss a misdemeanor trespassing charge against Sara Brady, a prominent supporter of his campaign. Okay, Jim, define prominent for us. Now, if you mean a prominent supporter in that she said, yeah, I definitely support this guy because his message is pro-freedom or because he recognizes that there are proper limits to government power. Okay, that is definitely something that a prominent supporter would say. Actually, I found myself being somewhat of a prominent supporter, and I'm really not into politics. But for those reasons, yes, many people were prominent supporters of his campaign. Now, can you show any kind of financial support or anything like that? See, this is just, this is trying to cast doubts. Well, she's a prominent supporter. People are left to draw their own associations. Did she materially move his campaign? Did he run on the campaign of, I'm going to free Sara Brady? No, but he definitely ran on the campaign that it is time for a freedom-minded attorney general. There's far too much statism, both Republican and Democrat flavored. There's more than enough to go around. But to have someone who actually understands and values freedom, that is something that a lot of people have been waiting for, and that's why he overwhelmingly crushed his competition. Even when the old school Republicans and the old school politicians like Jim Jones all circled the wagons around Tom Arkush saying he's the better choice, he's the better choice. Anyway, moving on. Brady was charged with trespassing by the city of Meridian for allegedly refusing to leave a playground the city had closed to curb the spread of COVID-19. Did the city have the legal standing to close that playground? Did it do anything to mitigate the curb the spread of COVID-19? Okay, the first one, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But we all know the answer to the second part of that question. It did nothing. All the shutdowns, all the lockdowns, all the mandates, They didn't do a dang thing. How do we know this? Because everybody got the virus anyway, including the people who were vaccinated. So enough with let's pretend that, well, if it weren't for Sara Brady taking her kids to the park, why, this would have stopped COVID so much earlier. It's a load of crap, and you know it is. Because the city's contract prosecutor had a conflict of interest concern, the AG's office agreed to handle prosecution. Now, Labrador's office prevented what Jim Jones calls some feeble grounds. And when he says feeble grounds, this is purely subjective on his part. He presented some very solid grounds. Number one, this thing had drug on for way too long. Way too many taxpayer resources had been used to try to bring this woman to justice. Which, again, what exactly is justice going to look like here? She was told by a cop to leave when he started counting down. She said, "What are you going to do, arrest me?" And the cop, with his ego wounded at that point, decided, yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now, the state drugged this on for the better part of 2.5, almost 3 years. Again, what would justice look like? Who was the victim? It can't be the state. The state is, that's an abstract. Who is the actual victim? Where was the actual harm? You know the answer as well as I do. There was none. But he claims that there was certainly enough evidence for a jury to convict Brady. Actually, that's one of the very reasons why the Attorney General's office, in conjunction with the prosecutors on the case, who unanimously said, yeah, we think we should dismiss this, they decided to dismiss the case because they felt like if we take this in front of a jury, the jury is going to laugh this out of court. They're not going to convict her. And if you doubt, well, I'm sure somebody on that jury would have common sense. Well, I would hope so, because it only takes one juror to hang the jury. It takes one person unwilling to give a vote of guilty, and then you have a mistrial, and the state has to decide, is it worth rehashing this again and prosecuting the case further? Moving on. Brady had unsuccessfully sought dismissal of the charge in lengthy court proceedings. Yes, she had. And one of the reasons she had is because it was taking so long. Where's the right to a speedy trial? What exactly does that mean? It was the court that kept dragging out her court dates. And here, Jim, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. It's easy to be misinformed, but I think this looks like an outright lie, and that would really disappoint me, because I think you're an honorable man, or at least you present yourself as an honorable man, but this looks like pure falsehood. Fortuitously for Brady, the trial was scheduled for after the change of administration. Oh yeah, they did that on purpose, wink, wink, partly because of COVID and partly because of delays occasioned by Brady's attorneys. She wanted to get it over with. She has been on this program numerous times and told you that in her own words. She had no interest in trying to drag this out longer until, let's see if we can get, somebody in there who's a little more, amenable to her particular brand of crime. So it was on the part of the state, and it was concerns over COVID. Well, we have to delay trial because we're concerned about actually holding a trial when there's COVID about. And then it was concerns over, we have to push it back again. They did this time and time again. Sara was the one wondering, when am I ever going to see the inside of a courtroom? When am I ever going to be able to tell my side to a jury? Yeah, they did offer her a plea deal. $50, take the plea deal. We'll make this whole thing go away. She wouldn't do it. Ask yourself, $40,000 in legal fees, all the ugly publicity, and a press that loves public stonings and just lining up, holding people's coats. Here, have some more rocks. Here's some rotten tomatoes. Anything. Wouldn't it be easier just to get that over with and to pay the $50 and say, yes, I was guilty of trespassing? She didn't do it. And some would say, well, it's because she wanted attention. Are you sure? That's not the kind of attention that a person would really want. She did it because she knew she wasn't in the wrong, and the state was determined to make her say uncle. Now, Jim Jones says Labrador had a clear conflict in handling the case because of Brady's prominent support for his election. Prominent support. She was a supporter of his. She actually showed up at his at one of his campaign events, and I think she showed up at the election night celebration when he won. But get this, and because of his widely publicized opposition to COVID restrictions, which were not necessary, which were absolutely illegal, and which the government, the various agencies that were enacting them, had no legislative power to enact. They didn't have the authority to do it, and they were not to be enforced like law. Something that's lost on our former Attorney General. He should have advised the city of his conflict and its need to secure other prosecution instead of unilaterally seeking to dismiss the charge. Again, it was with the attorneys, the prosecutors within the Attorney General's office, who unanimously said, let's dismiss this. This has gone on long enough. So, Jim, I'm sorry. You have slipped in my eyes, and I was willing to give you the benefit of the doubt, but good heavens. What exactly would justice look like? I think in Jim's eyes, justice is when the state's will prevails, and nothing short of that is going to satisfy what he's thinking. Now, hot on his heels, here comes the Lewiston Tribune, and Labrador's allies will remember after you forget. Oh my goodness, look at this. You think if you think Jim Jones was on a tear, check this out. They talk about the case had been pending since April 21st, 2020, when Walton Brady, that's Sara, practically goaded a Meridian cop to cite her for entering a closed city park playground. She told him, "What are you going to do? Arrest me? Okay, fine, arrest me." Now, she was not daring him. She wasn't like provoking him, sticking her finger in his face and screaming at him. He was threatening to arrest her, and she said, "Fine, go ahead." And he did. This was in the initial weeks of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I know we're supposed to, everybody was scared. Nobody knew what to do. We still knew right from wrong. Now, of course, they take this in a whole different direction. Well, the incident inspired professional insurrectionist Ammon Bundy to lead a mob to the home of the Meridian cop who detained Walton Brady. Ammon, you just got a field promotion here. I thought you were just a staunch advocate for freedom and sometimes troublemaker, but now you're a professional insurrectionist. The funny thing about that isn't insurrection illegal? I'm just thinking. I've heard somewhere that's like really deeply illegal. Like they hang you for that kind of stuff, and yet Ammon's a free man. Not without his detractors, not without troubles and legal challenges and whatnot, but. Yeah, hardly an insurrectionist. I mean, it's a good use of hyperbole, but you might want to save it for something that actually counts. And to lead a mob to the home of the Meridian cop who arrested, not detained, he arrested Walton Brady. It wasn't a mob. Now, it was a group of protesters, which to you, if it's someone standing up for themselves, that may very well look like a mob, but help me understand, what exactly differentiates a mob from a group of protesters? I would think violence would be probably the key distinction, or calls for violence. There were none. There were people who were plenty pissed off, and that's understandable. But why wouldn't they be? A woman dragged away in front of her kids in handcuffs for bringing them to the park and refusing to tuck her tail between her legs and whimper and scamper away when a top dog barks at her? Please. Let's continue. Because it was a political hot potato, the Ada County prosecutor booted the case to the Attorney General's office. Probably a pretty smart prosecutor. I don't want the egg on my face. Walton Brady was set for trial on January 24th. Again, after 2.5 years of delay. Then Labrador took the oath of office and Walton Brady's legal headaches vanished. Why, it almost sounds like a conspiracy. Would you guys like to come right out and call it a conspiracy? Okay, maybe not, but they're going to let us try to fill in our associations. Labrador dropped the case. He said it wasn't worthy of his time and he didn't expect to prevail. Actually, he listed 3 very, very clear reasons why. Number one, he didn't feel that the case had the merits to succeed, and especially before a jury, and that enough time and resources had been wasted on it. Again, if this is about justice, who was the victim? Who needed to be made whole after Sara Brady told that cop, "What are you going to do? Arrest me?" Because she wouldn't immediately depart with her children when a cop barked at her. Now, of course, Walton Brady is a big fan of Labrador. Well, let's cast some aspersions here, shall we? Tribune, tell us. Oh, she even wore a strapless dress with Labrador's campaign logo at both the GOP primary and general election victory celebrations. Okay, what does that prove? I mean, look, Sarah's not afraid of the spotlight, but it's not something she was seeking on her own, okay? She became a public figure, reluctantly dragged into the spotlight by shysters and spinmeisters in the press, determined to make an example out of her for defying our dictates or the dictates of the people in power that we love. But the fact that she wore a dress, and by the way, the dress said, elect Labrador, is really kind of a cool thing. Okay, I'm not into fashion. I'm not really into politics, but, to each his own. What exactly did it mean? Was it the reason that he got elected? I mean, I don't know. Are we supposed to was there a conspiracy here? Come on, guys, you're going to have to speak up. You can't just drop these big pregnant hints and then just walk away. You have to wonder how many local prosecutors will have second thoughts about disqualifying themselves and deferring to Labrador's ethical standards, or in this case, common sense. How far do you have to milk this thing before you realize we look stupid and tyrannical for doing so? Well, the Tribune's editorial board says, unfortunately, there is no leeway when it comes to criminal appeals. Post-conviction, it is up to Labrador's office to represent the state in those appeals cases. And here, they really wind it up for a flight of fancy. Suppose for a moment that one of Bundy's cases works its way up to the appellate courts. You know, the funny thing is, though, when Ammon was convicted of trespassing, he paid his fine, he accepted the jury's decision, and went on with life. He's facing a civil suit right now. I don't know if that one would make the way of the appellate court, but, you know, Bundy, that's supposed to scare people. That's supposed to get them in panic mode. And obviously, Raul Labrador is just, you know, he's one of the Bundy cronies. Is he really? Well, let's see if they're just prognosticating or if there's any truth to that. Or if they really want to add on some fear, how about, for the sake of argument, former state representative Aaron von Erlinger of Lewiston, who continues appealing his conviction for the rape of a legislative intern. Labrador may not drop their cases, but what's to stop him from soft-pedaling them? Okay, you're arguing things that have not happened and playing what if? What if? As someone used to say, I mean, it used to be with the Queen of England, now that she's not around, and if the Queen of England was plumbed differently, she would be the king. Why don't you stick to what's going on in reality? And the reality is, Raul Labrador corrected a grievous wrong that went on for far too long in talking with these prosecutors who unanimously agreed we should drop this case. He moved for the case to be dropped. A judge agreed and dropped the case. Done. Now, if you're one of those people who still feels like, well, somehow justice was thwarted. Somehow, you know, there was a crime committed and you know, Sara Brady needs to pay for it. I want you to bear with me a minute, okay? I don't dispense medical advice or mental health advice. I'm not a mental health practitioner. I'm not a medical doctor, but I want you to try something therapeutic just to see if this changes your point of view at all. I'd like you to just hold your hand up just right alongside your face like this, and I'd like you to slap yourself hard. Do it 2 or 3 times. Do it as many times as it takes until you stop needing to control other people so badly that you would be willing to ruin their lives to make that happen. Keep it up. You'll be a decent human being at some point, but you keep the slapping up until your mind starts to open a little bit. The Attorney General of Idaho, says the Lewiston Tribune, just took a dive on a criminal case. Criminal. Involving a woman who described him as genuine and a strong attorney general for the state of Idaho. Wow, those are controversial ways to talk about somebody. That's as good as saying, you know, a criminal crony who will do whatever I tell him to do, especially if I blink at him and smile. And he did so in full view of the public. Now, humor me on this one. I'm not going to ask you to slap yourself again, but you might want to do it anyway if you're still having apoplexy here. If he had brokered some kind of a backroom deal quietly, and suddenly it was just announced, well, we've worked out some kind of a deal and the charges have been dismissed, how would that have been received by the press corps? How would that have been received by, again, these Karens who just think that, well, because she said no, because she didn't, do what someone in authority was saying, they were offended by it. You know that they would call that a conspiracy. They would say that's just proof of some kind of a backroom deal. Oh, that's the worst thing. But he did it in full view of the public, in their own words. In other words, it was done in the light of day. This was not some secret operation to get her off for a crime. Give it a rest, okay? The histrionics are really a bit tiresome, and it really concerns me. What would it take for those who have that mindset to actually say, boy, that looks like injustice? I'm not sure I want to know. Hey, speaking of the perpetually offended, oh dear. A Jerome legislator apologizes for inappropriate remarks and reiterates support for women's right to choose. This is Representative, or is it Senator Nelson? I've milked a few cows, spent most of my time walking behind lines of cows. So if you want some ideas on repro, meaning reproduction, and the women's health thing, well, I have some definite opinions. Okay, this is a dairyman joking around. He's joking about biology. He's not comparing women to cows. He's just saying, I know how the whole reproduction thing works. Now, that's quite an affront in a world where, someone simply asserting, I am a man, I am a woman, whatever. You are supposed to believe it wholeheartedly. Nobody's even supposed to raise an eyebrow. Nelson laughed at the apparent joke before continuing his introduction. Afterwards, the comments were excerpted from his roughly 45-second speech and posted on The Idaho Democratic Party Facebook page. Oh boy. Talk about some blue-haired little hens waiting for something to irritate them. Well, they found plenty. And from there, it began circulating on social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit. Now, the funny thing about it is the Senator Nelson, he's trying to abase himself. He's apologized to people. He's walked it back. And this is a really good indication of what's wrong with politicians who are willing to bend whichever way the wind blows. They're willing to do whatever. Please just tell me what it takes to make you like me. I'm not a right-wing Republican, Nelson said during an October candidate forum hosted by the Mountain Express. I'm a firm believer in people's rights, my body, my choice. For example, no one should tell you should have to get a vaccine. Whoops. Maybe that's why they're so offended. That should be between you and your doctor. I feel the exact same way about women's health care. I know that Nelson didn't ask for my advice, but don't try to please the perpetually offended. You can't do it. They will always find a reason to be offended. That's part of what they do. Just, be yourself. Expect to be called out. Expect to have the slings and arrows thrown at you. And, don't go out of your way to make people miserable, but don't be ashamed to own your viewpoint. Well, who am I talking? He's a politician. Okay. A statesman would understand what I'm saying. A politician, probably not. So the spin continues now. And this is based on the whole gender inclusion policies in Idaho schools, why they've existed for years. Districts report no problems. But boy, there was a big to-do earlier this week at a Caldwell school board meeting where parents and a state senator stood up and said, no, this is not right. The Idaho Hatesman, actually, I didn't coin that phrase. Some commenter on Twitter did, but the Idaho Statesman angrily gets after this state senator, angrily demanding that school board members simply drop a proposed policy without discussion or consideration is not how any policy should be handled. Well, let's try to be a little more truthful in how we talk about that then, because it wasn't a demand that you drop this policy without any discussion. They were there to be heard, and there were plenty of parents who were being heard, and this state senator stood up and he was heard as well. But his main complaint was that the school board wasn't listening. In fact, they were talking. They were sitting there having conversations and ignoring him when he was talking to them. And it was because he started getting after them and getting loud that they went ahead and adjourned the meeting. Oh, they had a little taste of power, and well, our power is such that you cannot challenge this or you cannot doubt us in what we're doing. Look, I said it before, I'll say it again. There is no polite way that you can stand up for your children, especially in light of people who are very serious about trying to indoctrinate them into woke values, which, look, strip away the title woke. They are grooming not little perverts, although that may be part of the process, but what they're trying to groom are little left-wing activists. And gender confusion is one of the key tools. Now, in this case, the school policy in question is, well, we want boys to be able to use girls' restrooms, and likewise, just as long as they're just going by what they identify as. You may call us as backwards as you want, but people who are grounded in reality do not and will not accept that crap as legit. It's not. It's pushing the limits on boundaries that have been established, not just by our society, not by our backwards, Idaho farmers, but by societies throughout humanity who understood that there are differences between men and women. There are privacy concerns that need to be addressed. But we're supposed to be told, well, this happened in other schools. They snuck this in and they haven't had any problems. And, people who are paying attention, though, they see the rainbow flags popping up everywhere. They see the teachers wanting to know their students' pronouns, wanting to get them to question their pronouns and so forth. And we're fast approaching the point where, when you ask your kid, how was school today? This is the answer you're going to get because they're being force-fed so much garbage without ceasing. I know it may offend you that somebody, would stand up and would say something and not be just polite and have their hat in hand and be deferential to everything that someone in authority is saying. But in this case, it's the school board that is out of their lane. And these parents are absolutely right to step up. And when the school board downplays them or calls them deplorable, or the Idaho Hatesman calls them deplorable, for speaking out, they're even more justified to do so. Why are you so interested in keeping our kids trapped in a system where they can be indoctrinated? Which brings us to our final topic. Going to talk a little bit about vouchers. Luke Mayville stuck his foot in it, talking about last night, 4 Idaho senators joined with an Idaho Freedom Foundation spokesperson to lay out their plan for a universal education savings account vouchers on the model of Arizona. Okay, get ready. Here comes the spin. Arizona's problem cost 10 times more than predicted and blew a massive hole in the state budget. Wow, blew a massive hole? I mean, that almost sounds like a terrorist act or something that would happen with an out-of-control assault weapon or something. Yeah. Little hyperbole there, Luke, and sadly, the only massive hole that was blown as a result of that tweet was the hole blown in Luke's argument by Niklas Kleinworth from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, who pointed out Luke is confusing ESAs with his Medicaid initiative, which cost more than expected several times over and blew a hole in Idaho's state budget. But hey, if we use his measure of success, it would all be okay because thousands of kids would have access to quality education. I love it. Okay, I've had a lot of fun today at the expense of some of the people who are extremely into clutching their pearls right now. I would remind you, though, just because we're having fun at their expense, it's not right to throw garbage at them or otherwise call them out as they're walking down the street. Just understand, you are not likely to get a fair depiction of most issues, especially those involving personal freedom, in the mainstream media. It's just not going to happen. And sometimes there is malevolence that's behind the viewpoint that's being promoted. Usually it comes down to a matter of someone who does not want to offend those who are in power or someone who wants to see control over other people maintained. Every single one of the instances I've shared with you come down to a difference of people wanting to control other people and willing to commit injustice in order to do it. The lesson here is not that I have all the answers. It's not even that the Idaho Freedom Foundation has all the answers, although I will tell you they take very seriously the idea of freedom. They understand it matters. They're willing to do the hard work, to crunch the numbers, to research the topics, and to provide a point of view that's more fully fleshed out. You may still disagree, but at least you'll have a better idea of what's going on and less the preconceived notions that have already been pre-chewed for you and are being spoon-fed to you by highly paid blow-dried spinmeisters and propagandists. So approach it all with caution. That means you don't have to believe me. I would approach it with caution. Don't believe a word I say. Question everything. Treat other people according to the golden rule. And I'll see you here for the next episode of Nowhere to Hide, where we pick apart some of the more obvious examples of bias in our legacy media.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.